Millions of shallow lakes and ponds occur in lowland areas and floodplains, and they are the most abundant freshwater ecosystems throughout the world. Artificial shallow water bodies are also very common and have been constructed throughout history for many purposes. As a category of inland water ecosystems, shallow lakes and ponds are limnologically diverse, but they also have a number of features in common. Relative to deep lakes, loadings of nutrients are proportionately higher, losses are lower, and rates of nutrient recycling are faster in these shallow waters. Shallow waters are often well mixed in summer, and thus there is a tight connection between the water column and the sediments, as well as between the littoral zone and the open water region. Light penetration to the sediment's surface can potentially support the growth of submerged plants or benthic algae over much of the basin. Relative to their small size and volume, shallow lakes and ponds host a disproportionate taxonomic and functional richness. Collectively, they represent hotspots of biodiversity at the landscape level, and even temporary water bodies support diverse communities of microbes, plants, and animals. The community dissimilarity among lakes and ponds, beta diversity, is high, even at regional and local scales. This is related to the high variability in local abiotic filters, and to further species sorting via biotic filters. Different anthropogenic activities add new filters or modify these natural filters. The potential connectivity and dispersal with other lakes and ponds also affects their alpha, beta, and gamma biodiversity. Dr. Mariana Meerhoff is a professor of limnology at the Universidad de la República in Maldonado, Uruguay. Her research is on the functioning of freshwater ecosystems and their responses to human activities, and she has a special interest in the ecosystem functioning of shallow lakes and ponds. Here she introduces some of the ecological features of shallow water ecosystems.
At the local scale within a lake, 4 zones can be recognized: the benthic, the pelagic, the littoral, and the riparian. In shallow lakes and ponds, energy, matter, and information, that is genetic variation, is widely exchanged between these habitats. The littoral zone is defined as the lake area that is shallow enough as to allow the growth of submerged plants, and it typically represents the highest complexity. This habitat complexity is mostly provided by aquatic macrophytes of different life forms. In one of our early experiments, we tested the effects of plant architecture by placing artificial replicas of submerged and free-floating plants in similar shallow lakes in the temperate and in the subtropical zone. We found significant effects on fish populations, macroinvertebrates, and periphyton, both in the nature and in the magnitude of such effects.
From the earliest work of Lindemann onwards, shallow lakes and ponds have been of great theoretical interest as model systems to understand ecosystem processes, including ecological responses to environmental change. In general terms, changing environmental conditions can potentially lead to ecosystem change in a smooth, continuous way, or there may be a threshold response where the ecosystem shifts across a tipping point to a new state. Or there may be shifts among multiple states. In shallow lake ecosystems, there can be a striking pattern of regime shift from a state of clear water and dominance by submerged macrophytes to a contrasting state of turbid water and dominance by phytoplankton. Back to Professor Meerhoff, who describes some of the causes and consequences of these changes.
The stability of each of the alternative regimes or states relies on the occurrence of different stabilizing mechanisms that can be biological, chemical, and/or physical. When there is a regime shift, species diversity, functional diversity of key components of trophic webs change, and that further promotes changes in ecosystem structure and in ecosystem functioning. Such regime shifts can have profound, even catastrophic effects for certain biological communities. Also, shifts can be catastrophic for the ecosystem itself, and therefore there is a strong need for predicting the critical values or thresholds before such a shift happens. Those can be values in pollutants or nutrient loading, for instance. But despite a considerable amount of research, predicting or finding those values has proven extremely difficult.
Many anthropogenic impacts act in combination on shallow lakes and ponds, with unpredicted consequences due to potential additive effects or synergy. On a global scale, eutrophication remains the most pervasive impact, and these perturbations continue while new threats are emerging. The effects of climate change are increasingly clear at different spatial scales and at different levels of biological organization. This combination of multiple stresses has underscored the urgent need for restoration and conservation strategies. The widespread decline in biodiversity and water quality has triggered many efforts around the world to restore shallow lakes, and in particular from eutrophication. The aim is to reduce algal blooms, notably of harmful cyanobacteria, and to improve water clarity. Such restoration may also have the side benefits of higher biodiversity and lower carbon emissions, especially of the potent greenhouse gas methane. Dr. Mariana Beklioğlu is Professor of Limnology at the Middle East Technical University in Ankara, Turkey. Her work focuses on understanding the impacts of hydrological changes, global warming, and land use in shallow lakes. And she applies a variety of approaches, including in situ mesocosm experiments. Here she describes the importance of reducing nutrient loads as the first priority for successful restoration.
This priority restoration efforts is within the catchment of the lakes and ponds is to reduce the external nutrient loading to the lakes, and as it is the root cause of the eutrophication. For this, we need to control the point sources and diffuse sources. For point sources such as urban and industrial wastewater, which can be mitigated through sewage wastewater treatment systems and phosphorus with the efficient phosphorus and nitrogen removal, sewage effluent diversion, and also in addition to all these, we can use the phosphate-free detergents. For the diffuse sources, which are mainly coming through the surface runoff water, and the main cause of this is the agriculture, both crop farming and animal farming, and this requires multiple approaches to control the diffuse sources, like improved animal management, better manure handling, precise fertilizations, winter crop cover, restoring wetlands and riparian zones, and natural hydrology. That all these combined efforts can enhance the nutrient retention and reduce the erosion. However, even with the significant reduction in the external nutrient loading, the recovery may be hindered by the internal chemical and biological resilience. And especially internal chemical resilience is related with the amount of nutrients, especially phosphorus, stored in the sediment. So for this, we have several approaches that especially focuses on to locking the nutrients in the sediments.
This nutrient locking can be by way of chemical treatments that flocculate particles and adsorb phosphorus, for example, aluminum sulfate or alum, or binding agents such as the lanthanum clay treatment Phoslock that binds phosphorus in the water column and sediments. Additional internal control strategies include dredging and removal of nutrient-rich bottom sediments, bottom water oxygenation to prevent or slow the development of anoxic sediments that are prone to high phosphorus release, restoration of aquatic macrophyte beds by transplanting and protection of submerged plant species and communities, and different types of biomanipulation such as stocking piscivores to reduce the predation by planktivorous fish on zooplankton that in turn remove algae, selective removal of planktivores, and selective removal of bottom-dwelling fish that disturb the sediments and stimulate nutrient release. These internal controls vary in cost and may have only temporary effectiveness, requiring ongoing treatment. They are not appropriate to all lakes and climate zones, and each lake requires a management strategy that is tailored to its individual characteristics. Control of external nutrient load provides the best approach, but it is a long-term management strategy, and the results may not be seen for a decade or longer after the loading reductions. From the poles to the tropics, many shallow lakes and ponds have already become saltier or have disappeared due to climate warming and water extraction. Many more are expected to disappear or change dramatically in the coming decades. Eutrophication and climate change are expected to interact, leading to a loss of biodiversity, increased cyanobacterial blooms, and a higher carbon footprint. Conservation of these resources will require attention to outcomes, implementation, planning, and cross-cutting issues. Both local and global actions are needed to protect these species-rich ecosystems and their ecosystem services from future change.